Good evening and welcome to the Township of Woolwich Committee of the Whole meeting on March 21st, 2022. We are now live on YouTube. I will now do a roll call of council. I, Councillor Shantz, am present and chairing this meeting. Mayor Shantz.
I'm present.
Councillor Martin.
Present.
Councillor Merlihan.
Present.
Councillor Redekop.
Present.
And Councillor McMillan was not able to join us this evening. The land on which we meet has been here from time immemorial. People have inhabited Southern Ontario for about 10,000 years, and we acknowledge the neutral people, also called Attawadurun, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee, people who lived here when settlers arrived who shared this land with us. May we together learn to care for and respect each other, our flora and fauna, and the land we inhabit together. Do any members of council have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. On the second planning public, we own property across from the Coons gravel pit, so I'm going to declare on that one and step out.
Anyone else? Not seeing any. Items to come forward from closed session, we have none. And planned public meeting. The following portion of the meeting is for information only and no decisions will be made tonight. Any questions can be directed to Development Services staff following the meeting. I declare the planning public meeting to be open. This evening, we have Manager of Planning, Jeremy Vink, with us to provide an overview of the first information report. Mr. Vink.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of council. The first application is Zone Change 2 2022 for Riverland or the Empire Subdivision. This is specifically mostly for Block 53 to amend the zoning on that block, which is zoned R7B with site-specific provisions. Those current provisions allow for row townhouses, a multi-unit block, or a back-to-back townhouses. They're liking to amend that zoning to also allow for stacked townhouses. And all these developments could take place then on an internal road allowance within this block, and they would be rental units as they're proposed at this time. So they're just proposing to amend the site-specific zoning wording that's in our current zoning. So there's provisions around the type of units, the height of the buildings. There'll be some provisions around parking requirements, etc., to facilitate that development. As part of this, they're also proposing to amend the draft plan approval to increase the number of units on Block 53 to go from 115 to, they're proposing 146, a max of 155. Also, they're looking to amend the phasing in the current stage of subdivision to split up phase 3 into another phase to allow for the development of a phase 4. And that will just split this last section up of the development. As you could note, this portion of the plan is the section that is off of the future Ottawa Street extension in by Shallow Creek. So if you're trying to find it in Breslau, it is on that south end off of Shallow Creek where you'll find Block 53 in and around behind the school towards that Ottawa Street extension is the lands that we're looking at. If there's any questions, I can answer them. I know the applicant also has a presentation for you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Council, any questions for Mr. Vink? Councillor Merlihan.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair Shantz, to Mr. Vink. This is, I guess, the second time this has come forward asking for amendments. And the first time, the request, council had asked about adding some affordable housing units into the development, which they agreed to. I believe there was 15 spots. I'm wondering what this second amendment, adding a number of new units to the development, if a proportional amount of affordable housing units were also included in that. So, you know, an additional 5 or whatever the percentage of the 15 out of the first was just added to this second amendment.
So yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Merlihan. Good question. This actually is a follow-up from that first present application we had last year, where council authorized them to increase the number of units from 50 to 75, similar to Thomasfield. So that's the number of units per phase in the subdivision that they can have each year. So this is just moving that forward the next step. So council gave approval last year to increase the number of units, subject to them coming in and making some amendments. One amendment is the amendment to the draft plan. And the other amendment obviously means they have to amend the zoning to kind of reflect that, to allow for that proposed density we're looking at this block to give us those affordable units. So it's not a second proposal as much as it's just moving forward with that proposal you approved last year and bring it through the next planning processes of amending the actual subdivision agreement and amending the zoning to match. So it's not new, it's the same thing, just starting through the planning process. That's what's happening at this point.
Oh, okay. I guess I misunderstood, because just the way the report was written, it seemed like there was new units being added this time around. So that's fine.
Yeah, it's just it's just because the current plan of subdivision that's you approved many years ago, had less units on the block. So when we saw this last fall, they were proposing the 146, and we're just working out the final design that they could bring forward now to amend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Bink? Not seeing any. Next, we will hear from Amanda Kozlowski of Armstrong Planning, who is representing the applicant this evening. Ms. Kozlowski, sorry. Please turn your video and microphone on, and you can proceed when you're ready.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, I will share my screen to share my presentation as well. So I think that should get us to my screen. And good evening, Chair and members of committee. As I was introduced, my name is Amanda Kozlowski. I work with Armstrong Planning and Project Management, and we're acting as agent for Riverland Area 2 GP Limited, but better known to most of staff and councillors and the community as Empire Communities. We're here today because we are requesting a red line revision to the draft plan of subdivision, approved to support the Riverland Area 2 subdivision, and a zoning bylaw amendment specific to what is known as Block 53, as Jeremy introduced. The proposed red line revision is to reflect changes to Block 53, again, as Jeremy mentioned, changes to the phasing lines, and to update some of the internal unit count and breakdown to reflect what is being built and proposed in coming phases. Pardon me, some of those changes are essentially to reduce some of the larger lots. There are 12.8 meter lots. Those are 42 feet wide, and with housing prices and material costs these days, demand for larger homes is actually starting to go down. And so the idea would be to introduce some smaller lots within the zoning currently permitted under the zoning bylaw and within what would be now the current maximum. So right now the draft plan is approved with a maximum of 583 lots or units. There are 308 units that have been registered to date in phase 1 and phase 2. Those were registered in 2018 and in 2021. And moving forward, we're looking to change those numbers to increase them to a proposed maximum unit 600 units, which is an increase in 17, and a proposed maximum lot count or actual lot count of what we'll see realized on the ground of 593, which is an additional 10. And there's always a difference between the maximum approved lotting on the draft plan and the actual lot count. Once we get done with it, the lot count is usually lower than what is approved, or is always lower than what is approved through the draft plan, because we work with lotless blocks. And so what that does is provide a maximum number of lots and a minimum lot width within a block. And so there's always a little bit of flexibility as we start adding exterior side yards to some lots where they're needed. We're starting to reduce the overall lot count that is permitted within that block. And it's just a way that we've found provides enough flexibility so we're not constantly or consistently having to come back to Committee of Adjustment to request minor variances. In addition to the red line revision, we will increase the density in block 53, which is currently designated by the township official plan as medium high density. Recently that we've been working with the township and we've been asked to try to increase that density. And one of the reasons is so we can provide some of that affordable housing. And so the original plan was approved with up to 115 residential units within block 53, and we're now proposing 146. 146 is the highest density that we can get that still falls under what is considered a medium density in that medium high density block. And so we don't need an official plan amendment, but we are looking to request this red line revision that will allow the additional units within that block and the draft zoning bylaw to amend the draft zoning bylaw to update some of the site specific standards that will allow the revised townhouse plan that we're proposing. And so this is just sort of reviewing some of the numbers, the draft plan versus the lotted plan, and where these numbers and where the lot counts are changing. So you'll see a change in 12.8 meter lots, which are the larger lots, and an increase in the medium high density block within the site. Block 53, we are requesting a site specific zoning bylaw amendment to facilitate this revision or revised concept plan that has been developed. Block 53 is located in the southeast corner of the approved Riverland Area 2 subdivision. It's 2.93 hectares or about 7.2 acres in size, and is directly west of the Breslau Mennonite Church and the new 4.5-story apartment building there and other existing employment lands. It's also just south of the Riverland Area 1 subdivision that is built out and homes on Starlight Avenue, and that has been considered in the design for the concept plan and the requested zoning. So as requested by the township, the proposed zoning and concept plan will maximize the density allowed within the block and make smaller sized units available to prospective residents. As Jeremy mentioned, Empire's planning to build this development block as a rental block, and including in which 15 affordable units. And so that is some of the reasoning why we're coming back to ask for additional unit sizes, because there's an affordability that you attain by providing smaller units. There's also an affordability now obtained through these affordable 15 designated affordable units. So the existing zoning on the site is currently R7B, which is a residential multiple design guidelines and mixed use. So it allows for higher density multiple residential buildings. The site-specific zoning currently allows townhouses as an allowable use or a row house dwelling. And the site-specific exceptions are generally related to minimum setbacks, so side yard setbacks within the block, and a maximum number of townhouse units stacked side by side, as well as the provision for a minimum number of visitor parking spaces on site. The proposed zoning would stay R7B, residential multiple, but what we would hope to do through this zoning bylaw amendment is update some of the site-specific standards. And these new site-specific standards would define new housing typologies that don't currently exist within the township zoning bylaw. We would also update standards related to maximum number of units and buildings on a site and minimum lot width and areas, maximum lot coverages. The proposal currently maintains the minimum yard setbacks that were approved and are existing on site, and that includes a 7-meter setback, which is equivalent to what is a rear yard in the Riverland subdivision. So the townhouses on the north end of the site have a 7-meter rear yard setback that they must meet, and that is no change to what's currently approved on site right now. And the east, the south, and the west side already have a 4.5-meter minimum side yard setback or front yard setback, depending on where you are, and those will be maintained. Also being maintained from the current parent bylaw is the maximum height allowed on site, which is 3 stories or 12.5 meters. We are not proposing any changes to that. So here's a quick site plan of a concept plan of what we're proposing. There is a site plan application under review at the same time. And that's just to facilitate timing and staff resources as we're working through this. So as noted, block 53 is currently approved for 115 units. We are now proposing 146 units, which is the maximum we're permitted under the medium density designation within the official plan. And that's an increase in 31 units. These units will be a mix of standard and rear lane towns and stacked towns, and range in size from approximately 800 square feet to about 1,700 square feet. The current concept plan shows 17 standard townhouses in purple that back onto the existing Riverland Area 1 subdivision. So that's where that 7-meter setback will be maintained. I think actually based on the detailed concept plan, we're at 8 meters plus I think there's a rear deck encroachment within to that 8 meter. So it's actually better than the 7 meter. And then as you can see, because this property line is not parallel to the units, the setback actually increases. There are 45 rear lane townhomes that front onto Shallow Creek Road and the future Ottawa Street extension, which is the right side of the screen. And those provide vehicular access at the rear, which means the public realm is front yards, front landscaping, and front doors instead of garage doors, which is a nice element. It also keeps all that additional traffic and parking movements within the private site instead of on Shallow Creek Road. In addition, there are 6 buildings with 84 stacked townhouse units internally to the site. And then you can see the surface parking. Parking is being provided at a rate of 2 parking spaces for every standard townhouse unit, 2 parking spaces for every rear lane townhouse unit, and 1.5 spaces for all the stacked townhouse units. In addition to those minimum parking spaces, we're proposing 44 visitor parking spaces. So there should be ample parking available on this site to tenants. I believe the current zoning bylaw requires 1 parking space for standard towns and 1 parking space for rear lane towns, but I could be mistaken, but I think there will be ample parking available on site. There's also garbage proposed throughout the site, which is helpful to encourage easy use and recycling. To add some clarity, I've discussed a few times or mentioned a few times that one of the components of this site-specific zoning bylaw amendment being requested is to revise the definition or add a definition for a stacked townhouse unit. And that's because a stacked townhouse unit isn't currently defined in the bylaw. The current definition allows for row townhouses, which have common walls on each one or both sides of a unit, whereas a stacked townhouse unit has common walls on one or both sides, as well as a horizontal common wall. It's a common floor at this point, or ceiling. It's not a wall at that point. But you can see on this diagram in front of you now, this is a standard 12-unit block or 4-bay block of a stacked townhouse unit. There's 1 unit that stretches from the front of the bay to the back of the bay or to the rear of the bay. And on top of that, there are 2 units that are 2 stories each that, for example, unit 2 fronts, let's call it the front of the building, whereas unit 3 fronts the back of the building. And there's a common wall between the 2 of them, a vertical common wall between unit 2 and unit 3, and a horizontal common wall between unit 1 and then unit 2 and 3. And so what we need to do is include a new definition for residential dwelling type within the zoning bylaw. We believe that this is an appropriate form of development and a concept plan that really thinks of the character of the existing neighborhood and respects and responds to sort of what the status quo is there. The stacked townhouse is a new use, we recognize that. But it's a great opportunity to increase density and to provide an option or an array of smaller unit choices within the Breslau area. So we think it's an appropriate form of development and is consistent with the intent of the zoning bylaw. To that, I will say thank you very much for listening to me tonight. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm more than happy to respond.
Thank you, Ms. Kozlowski. Any questions from council? Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. I might know the answer to this, but for the benefit of anyone else who is listening, can you talk a little bit about green space as well?
Yes, I apologize. Maybe I can share my screen really quickly again and get this up. Pardon me. I'll just come back to the concept plan. So we have there is green space proposed within these, the centrally located sort of stacked townhouse block area. There's actually, I've done the calculation today, there's about 24 square meters of amenity space or green space, open space within this block for the stacked townhouse units. They will be accessible to all the townhouses within block 53. But because the stacked townhouse units are more of an apartment, but with access direct from the outside, they don't share a common hall. They also are sitting in this green space that will be designed to promote use and availability of more grass, green space, get outside. Each of the rear lane townhomes that are the gray units that front onto Shallow Creek Road or the Ottawa Street extension have rear yard spaces in the form of a raised deck that extends over the rear yard parking or over the driveway, and then the front yard space as well. And the standard towns all have standard rear yards that are at a minimum of 7 meters deep. And so it's a block in and of itself that provides its own green space. I know I read some of the comments that we got, and Riverland as a whole, Riverland Area 1 and 2, and the future phases, that's a different application that will have a different public meeting, have provided 5% or the minimum green space requirement and parkland requirement for the subdivision. In addition, we're proposing and have already actually transferred additional parkland to accommodate sort of the south end of the proposed development and Riverland subdivision as a whole. So this site has really good access to parks and open space.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Council Merlehan?
Yeah, thank you. Any chance you could stop sharing that so I can just see other people? Great,
Yes,
thank you. I have a couple of questions through you, Chair Shantz, to Ms. Kozlowski. Okay, on the affordable units, there's 15 that you have proposed in this development. Can you talk about, which, I guess you've got 3 different options in that development with stacked homes, towns, and some other thing, apartment. Will there be a mix of all of those 3 being allotted, I guess, to affordable housing, as there'll be different needs, different family sizes and things like that that are required? Or are you planning on one particular type of unit that will be made available?
Right, through you, Chair, the current proposal, as has been discussed with staff, is that the affordable units will be provided in the stacked townhouse blocks. And that's because of how the affordable has been defined, which is a value. And to meet that value, the idea is to provide a smaller unit. That being said, the townhouses and the rear lane townhouses do have a fairly decent spread in terms of size. And as a result, in and of itself, the smaller units within this block as a whole provided a higher affordability than would be available sort of outside of that block.
Okay, and when you talk about affordability, when I'm thinking about this, if it's units with the region, that would be subsidized housing. Is this not subsidized, or is it just lower cost?
It's not subsidized. That would require sort of regional support. And although they do back this, of course, everybody wants to provide affordable housing. This is just a lower rental rate being set for those 15 units to meet that affordability level.
Okay, and is the developer going to lock in that rental unit, the pricing for those rental units at that affordable rate for 20 years or something like that?
Yes, through you, Chair, the intent would be to enter into a development agreement that sets and secures those rates for, we've done similar agreements in different municipalities, and typically it's about a 20-year agreement that sets it, because after 20 years you have to start improving and updating and there's higher maintenance costs. And it seems to
Okay.
be that the 20 years is what seems to work well.
Okay, and then I just had another question on, I guess is Empire is in the business of doing rentals and such. That wasn't something that I was aware of. A lot of developers around here don't like to get into that business, but will Empire then be maintaining the properties, garbage collection, all that kind of stuff? Is that that'll be on this developer, and they don't have any intention of selling it off to somebody else?
So Empire this past summer, I mean, in COVID, I apologize. In COVID, everything is a time warp for me, but Empire did recently just start an Empire rental living division. So they are working on that. It's still brand new in Canada because of the development process. It's taking us a while to get through the approvals and get building, but they do have a rental division that will be managing and operating this, coordinating garbage pickup and grass maintenance, landscaping, snow clearing, and such.
Okay, and then my final question is, when is the proposed start date on this development?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the agreement that we have met or reached with township staff and council is to get our first building permits this calendar year, so before the end of December 2022. We are working, detailed engineering drawings have been submitted and are under review. Staff has been great in giving us very quick feedback and keeping us really well appraised of where they're at in their review. And we're hoping to get shovels in the ground for servicing this year.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Not seeing any. Thank you, Ms. Kozlowski. I guess you can turn your camera off and you can stand by if you want. And I'll now ask the clerk if there are any unregistered participants in this meeting for this report. Clerk Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, there are no additional unregistered participants tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Again, we have Mr. Vink again with us to provide an overview of the second report. Mr. Vink, please continue when you're ready.
Thank you once again, Council. So this is zone change application 3, 2022 for Raymond Coons haulage. This is for the property 889 Bridge Street West, just on the boundary with the township in the city of Waterloo. The applicant runs a gravel pit operation there, and as part of that, the approvals granted them a temporary use for a topsoil operation. So as a temporary use, they have to be renewed every 3 years. So he's up for the renewal again. So the applicant is proposing to renew the temporary use to continue the topsoil operation. In addition, at this time, the applicant is also asking to increase the area of operation for the topsoil from 1 hectare to 1.25 hectares. So as I mentioned, it is accessory to the gravel pit operation, which means the gravel pit is the main function still taking place, and the topsoil is to remain temporary relative to that. There are regulations in the current zoning around that. So none of the other temporary use provisions around the topsoil operation are proposed to be amended other than the size of the operation. Staff can answer any questions. I'm not sure if the applicant is here, but I can answer any questions tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Any questions for Mr. Vink? Councilor Merlehan.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair Shantz, to Mr. Vink. Is there a lifespan on the gravel pit at all?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, Chair to Councilor Merlehan. No, there is no lifespan on the gravel pit. As you may be aware, we've had challenges around that, and we're not able to put on lifespans on a gravel pit. So the province overrides those. So this pit has been going on, I think from about 2006, and it's in phase 2 right now. Near the end of phase 2, and they have a third phase. So they could be going for another number of years at this point. Although they could have, if they had extracted everything at their maximum capacity, but had the pit depleted probably a few years ago.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Councilor Martin?
Thank you. Through you to Jeremy. So the topsoil business is to be secondary to the aggregate business? Is that what you're telling me? And do we have any idea how much aggregate is actually coming out of there? Because I would think the topsoil is the primary business, but that's only my observation.
Through you to Councillor Martin. Very good question. Part of the requirements of the zoning are that the applicant is to provide in confidence to the township staff details around amount of gravel extracted and amount of topsoil being brought in and sold from the site. So those numbers are kept in confidence as their business information, but we are being given information along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? Seeing none, I'll now ask the clerk if there are any unregistered participants in the meeting for this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, through you, there are no additional unregistered participants this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. There being no further speakers, I declare the planning public meeting to be closed. So Mayor Shantz can come back and join us again. Welcome back. So we have no presentations, no delegations, no unfinished business. Before we pass the motion to receive the consent agenda items as a whole, does anyone wish to remove any of the items for further discussion? Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. Under correspondence 8.2.4, it's a Township of North Dumfries resolution regarding aggregate pits. And let me see if I can call it up here on my screen. Do you want me to just go ahead?
Sure, and I saw Councillor Merlehan's hand up as well. Do you want to pull something out as well?
It was the exact same one.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to bring anything? Okay, so can we pass them all except for 8.2.4? Do I have a mover? Councillor Merlehan? Oh, and seconder? Councillor Redekop? Any discussion on that? And all in favor? And that is passed. Okay, 8.2.4, Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, thank you. I read this through, and basically my understanding of the gist of it is to take a look at the existing gravel pits that are licensed and the amount of gravel that's currently available before we start adding more gravel pits. And so I think that's really good initiative, and I wonder if staff have any comments, maybe Ms. Freeze or Mr. Brenneman, on this proposal.
I see Ms. Freeze joining us, so go ahead.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I can speak to that. So I did take a look at that motion, and I do understand that it's going around for a number of different municipalities. We'll be going to Wilmot, I think next week. So yeah, council can choose to pass a motion like this. Obviously, aggregate extraction is provincially regulated. And right now, although the regulations say where possible, mineral aggregate extraction should be close to the markets as possible, it doesn't have a requirement for a demonstrated need of mineral aggregate resources or supply demand analysis to find out how much is actually needed to support those local markets. So it makes sense that when the province opens up the legislation for review, that the township would participate and comment on that legislation. I would caution council that if they choose to pass this motion now, it is a request to the province, but we would not actually be able to stop processing any gravel pit requests unless the province actually did invoke a moratorium. So it would be just a request at this time to the province to invoke a moratorium, or the request could be altered just to ask them to open up the legislation and review as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. And what would your best advice be on which way to go in terms of making an impact?
I think my best advice, I don't think that the province is in a position to invoke a moratorium, but I think that putting a request in to review the legislation makes sense. I think that eventually they will need to review the legislation. I think requesting that happens a little bit earlier and having an opportunity to comment on the revisions and on the things that are specific to the township would make sense. I think we make the request for a moratorium. It's very unlikely that the province will do it. That's just my opinion, though.
Okay, thank you. I'll let Councillor Merlehan have his say. I'm assuming he wanted to speak to it as well, and then perhaps we can decide what we want to do with that. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Merlehan.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, just general comments on this particular motion. There are some other motions floating around. Halton Hills passed a different one not too long ago as well on requesting a moratorium. The North Dumfries motion here, if you go over there into North Dumfries, they have so many gravel pits, and it's just decimating the land over there with how many gravel pits they have, and there just seems to be no end in sight for that municipality. We know, just going through the budget with the gravel pits that we have in Woolwich Township, the Ontario Stone and Gravel Association likes to put out some of their propaganda, but it only adds $30,000 to the township budget to as their little pennies for every truckload that come out of here, and the amount the municipality has to spend on road maintenance it doesn't even come close to the pittance that they're giving municipalities. But that's not the only reason to ask for a moratorium. The information being supplied by Ontario Stone and Gravel, we all received a letter from them that they resort. All of people complaining about gravel pits is just pure NIMBYism, and it's not. There's a lot of information out there, and their letter actually used zero facts when their website is called gravelfacts.ca, which is kind of funny. They use zero facts in their letter, and just it all boiled down to this is just pure NIMBYism, and we shouldn't be looking at it. I think the North Dumfries motion is certainly worth making the request to the province. I agree with Ms. Fries that if we have a conservative government, it's unlikely they're going to change any of that because of the amount of money that the Gravel Association provides that particular party. But we do, I think it's worth having the conversation and in the public and giving an opportunity. And then we're in an election year for those provincial politicians, and they should be put on notice that this is something municipalities and residents who live in areas that have gravel pits want to make an election issue, and they should be prepared to answer those questions. The small municipalities like ours and all that, we supply all the gravel for Waterloo, Kitchener, all that kind of stuff. And we get the headaches that go with it. So we'd like the support of those cities as well to recognize the inconvenience and other issues associated with gravel pits, and make this an issue worth talking about in this election coming up. So I support by seconding Mayor Shantz's motion there to support this if it goes that way. Thank you.
Thank you. And are you suggesting that we leave it the way it's written with the moratorium in? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I would suggest leaving it as is. They have a strong case to be asking for. Maybe Woolwich not so much, but overall that conversation needs to be had with rural townships and cities and fairness, and it's worth having the conversation for sure.
Thank you. And Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. I think my motion would be that we support the recommendation from North Dumfries, and partly for the reasons that Councillor Merlihan articulated, that you know, the issue per se is much stronger in North Dumfries. So rather than just putting it ourselves, I would put it as a support for North Dumfries. And just a couple of the whereases that really strike me is determining the need for new aggregate, looking at below water table to reflect current groundwater sciences. And I think that's really important. And then the thing I've been talking about for 7 years, cumulative impacts of the aggregate operations in terms of offsite impacts to environmental systems and groundwater regime, and contribution to area water courses, wetlands. So those are the particularly the three that speak to me. So my motion would be to that we support the motion from North Dumfries and send a copy of that to the parties that are listed on the bottom of that. Does that work for you, Councillor Merlihan? Yeah.
Yep, I'll second that.
Before we do that, wonder if we could add for them to address or readdress the sunset clause. That one is really a problem as well, because we've got a pit in Bloomingdale that's been non-active for years, and then all of a sudden now they're hauling a bunch of broken concrete there to make it look like it's active again, but they're not hauling anything out of there, and there's no sunset clause, so they can keep it going forever. So I wonder if we could add that to this, or how we could handle that. And is everybody else in agreement with that? Go ahead, Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, I'm okay to add that, and maybe we can get staff we can vote on it in principle, what we're talking about here, and maybe we can get staff to put the right words to it for next week.
Councillor Merlihan, are you okay seconding that?
Yes, I would be okay with that, and as long as what was I thinking? The sunset clause just. Okay, it's been a while since we talked sunset clauses, but I had a thought that I just escaped me as to what we should also add in addition to, and I can't think of it. So, but if we go with sunset clause, reviewing that legislation, I would second that.
Okay, so we had somebody move it and somebody seconded. I saw your hand up, Councillor Martin. Did you have something to? No? Okay. All right, I'll ask for the vote. All in favor? And that is passed. Okay. Oh, guess that's all for that. So we have staff reports and memos. This evening we have Lori Fox, Development Engineering Technologist, with us to provide council with an overview of her report. So go ahead, Lori. Welcome.
Thank you. Just bear with me a second here. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee chair and members of council. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lori Fox, and I am the engineering technologist in the Development Services Department here at the Township. On behalf of Development Services Services. I'm pleased to be here this evening to present information on our new engineering development and infrastructure manual. Most municipalities have a manual for engineering related standards to help streamline development and construction projects. The manual helps internal staff, developers, and installers understand technical requirements when designing and also when working on development sites and infrastructure projects here in the township. So why do we need standards? We need standards to provide a consistent end product for purchasers and property owners, as well as builders of township projects. These standards should consider the unique challenges and landscape we have here in the township. We also need standards to ensure the services that are installed under development applications and our own capital projects will provide long-lasting products for future maintenance in mind. A couple of years ago, township staff were contacted by staff from the Township of Woolwich, who were also interested in developing a similar manual. A partnership was developed for the project where staff and a consultant worked together to form a base document that both municipalities could use to create their own individual documents. From this collaboration, the Township of Woolwich Engineering Development and Infrastructure Manual, or EDIM as we call it, was created. During the development of the manual, during the development of the base manual, both townships forwarded draft versions of the manual to various stakeholder groups, such as our development partners, municipal partners, industry professionals, and internal staff. We received comments from these stakeholders and revised the manual where needed. So what does the manual set out to provide? It provides requirements prior to and during construction. It provides specific engineering design requirements for development and infrastructure projects. It provides requirements used after construction, such as inspection, maintenance periods, record drawings, and it provides a minimum level of service that the township is looking to achieve. Some benefits of having a manual like our EDIM are protecting the township from liability, protecting property owners, our own infrastructure, and the environment. It will also help to shorten review timelines and provide consistency for developers and contractors. Some general items included in the manual are requirements for submissions, road design, service designs, lot grading, and site-specific study requirements, and also requirements for fees, security, and insurance. We have included some standard drawings to assist with design. The manual is a living document that will require annual updates. These updates will consider changes in the industry, lessons learned by staff, and we will also ask for feedback and track all changes to the manual. Ongoing review and revisions to the manual will be completed by the Development Services Department. The manual will be available on the township website and also by email or through our customer service locations should anybody require printed copies. Thank you for your attention. At this time, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Questions, Council? Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Lori. Well done. So we don't have a current manual.
Through the chair, no, right now we don't have a current engineering standards manual. We have some other different manuals at the township, but the engineering standards manual we don't have.
So there's the guidelines in here. Presumably we had all those guidelines before, or a lot of them. Is there any significant difference between wherever it was recorded and maintained the guidelines that we were using to what's in the manual now? Is there anything significantly changed?
Through the chair and to the mayor, there's not really anything significantly changed. Before we were depending on development agreements and individual tenders to provide standards that we had here at the township. Now what we're doing is we're providing it in a document format for the different consultants and developers to use. We have had some lessons that we've learned over development in the last few years, and that's where we are. That's what's brought us to developing this manual.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Could I get you to stop sharing your screen? Ms.
Yes, sorry about that.
Thank you. And Councillor Merlehan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Councillor Shantz, through to Lori Fox. The guide, you talk about calling out for stakeholder comments and things like that. I did a real cursory read of your document, you know, just as much as I like to go and read the Ontario Building Code, which I don't read that either. But I didn't really see anything about dealing with the public, communicating with the public and expectations of the public, and if public have complaints about something, and I mean residents really. Is this guide mostly for dealing with development and bigger projects and stuff, and not just the general public?
Through the chair to Councillor Merlehan. Yeah, it is basically for development applications, that type of thing, and also for infrastructure projects. It sets our minimum standards and minimum service levels for those types of projects. There are some items in it that could deal with the general public. So let's say somebody had an issue with their lot grading or something like that. The manual would then come in and we could use that for that. But for the most part, it is for development projects and infrastructure projects.
Okay, and this guidebook is just for your department. It doesn't really transfer over to, you know, let's say Jeremy as the planning manager. Does it go into his department as well, or is he guided by other documents like places to grow, all those other overall, you know, official plans and such?
Well, through the mayor to the councillor, yes. This document is mostly for the development services department. The planning group do have their own documents that they do follow. Some of them are provincial documents and some of them are township documents. But this is more for development services, I said, for engineering development as opposed to planning development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Through you to Lori. First of all, thank you for all your work putting this manual together. My question comes from page 2, the last paragraph, where it states, the manual recognizes there may be cases where specific issues prevent the standard design requirements from being followed. Give me an example what that would look like.
Through the chair to Councillor Martin, that's a great question. There are sort of unique instances within the township. My time that I've been here, which has not been a long time, I've driven around and you see very unique landscapes, changes in grade, for instance, that maybe the manual wouldn't necessarily apply to. The best practice could be to do something slightly different than the manual, or in a different format that it's shown. And in that case, the director would have the option to allow something different than what is asked for in the manual. So it's the general engineering requirements, and then there would be very, very specific instances where we would accept something outside of those requirements.
Thank you. Councillor Redekop?
Yeah, through you, Chair Shantz, to Lori. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for your report and all your work, like Councilor Martin said. But I also want to highlight that you were in collaboration with the Township of Wilmot, which is really good to do because you can gain more information when you collaborate. And I really like to see that. So thank you again for that.
Thank you, Councilor Merlehan.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to actually the question that Councilor Martin asked. I guess this guidebook that you have, I'm glad that you said, you know, there's options to do things differently, and that this guidebook isn't going to handcuff the engineering to doing things a certain way when, you know, the reality sees that there's actually a better way to do it. Does it come to a staff decision, or the director's decision to say, yeah, okay, we're going to throw the book out on this one because it's different, or do certain tests have to be made to make sense that's in the book?
Through the chair to Councillor Merlehan. Yeah, so the way that it is set up, and this is the way that many manuals for different municipalities work, is the director can review proposals. Typically, the proposals would come from the developer's consultant or engineer for something other than the way that it's stated to be done in the manual. And so the director and staff would look at that, review it, and also sometimes there's opportunity for other things to be considered as well. It could be that we come up with a solution that is the best of both worlds, let's say. So that's the way that would work. It's actually not often that happens, because typically they can follow the standards. But when that does happen, we would definitely review any proposal they might have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just have one question or comment, I guess, and I believe it was in section 4, the landscape requirements. And I spent the better part of 2 terms trying to get a standard for topsoil, and I would have liked to see that spelled out in this manual so that it gets followed. Is there a reason why that got left out?
To the chair, when it comes to topsoil depth, the manual actually refers to the township's urban design guidelines. And for development applications, which is most of what we're talking about for this manual, for development applications, the minimum depth of topsoil in that under section 7 in that document states that it should be 0.6 of a meter or about 24 inches. So what we've done in the manual is we've referred to or deferred to that development guidelines manual. It keeps the actual measurement in one location, which would be that development manual. Then if it's ever considered again, it needs to be changed. It would be changed to that one location. And then this manual, our new EDIM manual, refers to that. So if it ever needed to be adjusted. But we should also keep in mind that minimum topsoil depths for yards, parks, boulevard areas are also covered off in the engineering design drawings for development as well. So those documents also indicate it could be an area that we want more than what the minimum requirement is in the manual.
Yeah, and I guess even as important or more important than that is to have it screened to a certain standard, because when I brought it forward, you see a lot of garbage and a lot of large stones underneath sod, and that was what I was going after. And I was wondering if that's written anywhere. Is that written in the other portion of the document then?
Yes, to the chair, that's actually also included in the urban design guidelines. It talks about screen topsoil to a certain depth. Yes.
Okay, and who's responsible for monitoring that then? Is it through the building code then, or how does that get monitored at the end of the day?
To the chair, the The urban design guidelines, that's a document that's taken care of by the planning group, I believe. So they're the ones that would consider changes if requested for, let's say, topsoil depth or the amount of screening that it would need to take place. But it's a township document and it's a township requirement. There are requirements under things like Ontario provincial standards and things like that. But those are usually less than what we are asking for here.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Fox? Not seeing any. Thank you very much for your report. Sorry, thank you, Councillor Martin. So there's a recommendation in this report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Martin, seconded. Councillor Redekop, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is passed. Thank you. Any other business, councillor reports, verbal update from Mayor Shantz? Yes, okay, you have the floor, Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. Just an update on the state of emergency. So 2 years ago on March 25th, a state of emergency was declared across Waterloo Region to deal with decisions that might have needed to be made as we headed into a pandemic that is carrying on much longer than any of us would have imagined at that time. On Friday, that is the municipalities of Waterloo Region, announced that with the exception of the region, we would rescind the emergency declarations effective Friday, March 25th. So just on the 2-year anniversary, it seemed like a good date. North Dumfries rescinded theirs separately a week or two ago. The reasons for the initial declaration that render the state of emergency no longer necessary include we set it up in order to deploy and support volunteers and to have them covered by workplace safety and insurance, to allow for potential decisions that may need to be made quickly, to support redeployment of municipal staff, to qualify for certain financial and government programs, and all of those things we just don't need anymore. We're to the point where the provincial decisions are working for us and that we're ready to move on. So I will also note, though, that the state of emergency still exists at the regional level, and that is particularly to support the ongoing vaccine clinics, the volunteers, and any staff redeployment associated with those. And then finally, I just wanted to speak to the end of the masking mandate, and that is a separate issue from the state of emergency. While we're eliminating the requirement for masking, there will be many who are uncomfortable in different situations. Some of you will continue to wear masks for a whole variety of reasons. Some of you may not. This world is not black and white. And this pandemic continues to be many shades of gray as well. So please be kind to each other, respect each other's choices, keep listening to our public health and the provincial medical officers of health as things change, and make wise choices for each time and place in which you find yourself. This virus is not done with us. So let's let our legacy read that we supported each other, we respected each other, and we cared for each other. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Shantz. I just have one quick question on the rescinding of that. Does that not have to come to council? That can be done without council being involved in that?
It can be, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Would you like to not rescind it? Or just,
No, I
okay.
I thought it came to council to implement it, and
I believe it was a mayor's prerogative to implement it, and then I updated council.
Yeah, okay.
So
I just in case,
thank you for asking that question.
in case
though.
the public
That's
was
good.
wondering how that works. So
Very
thank you
good
very much.
question. Thank you.
So, Are there any other reports from council? Councillor Merlehan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to continue the conversation that Mayor Shantz brought forward with the rescinding of the state of emergency. You know, you did say in your statement that we're not over with COVID, and you know, you look at numbers elsewhere in the world, and you know, in my own personal life, just today, I know 7 different people that came down with COVID today, including a Woolwich Healthy Communities volunteer. And, you know, that's more people in a day than I've had in the last 2 years where, you know, I've known people over the time, but for me, it's been hitting more personally than at any other time. So, you know, rescinding the state of emergency is one thing, but you know, following provincial guidelines is a little scary when we're going into an election year and you don't know what their real motivation is. So, you know, and I don't really want to put a whole bunch of doubt out there with this, but, you know, where are we going to be at if there is, you know, numbers continue? I mean, it sounds like like people just want this to be over, but, you know, I want people to be safe as well. And so anyway, those are just my comments. I don't expect anybody to answer that question. The other good thing I would have is a question through to Mr. Brenneman, and just asking what the township's position on is people coming back to work then, or even at the region if they're making the call on when the local governments go back to work.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to council. So all through the pandemic, certainly the region and area municipalities have been collaborating on various decisions to try and be as aligned as possible. And I emphasize as aligned as possible. One of the things that not too long ago we spoke about was with respect to the return to the work office environment. And I'll just speak tonight, though, to what we're doing. So the plan is for the month of March to have people in a minimum of 3 days a week. Then as of April 1st, 4 days, ramping up to 5 days as of the beginning of May. That's what the plan is now. Hopefully that can stay in place, pending, I guess, any sort of curveball like the pandemic sometimes has liked to throw us in the past. But that's the plan that we have in place right now with the phase in over March, April, and May.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And do we have any masking changes at all, like in the buildings?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to your question, for council's benefit, all of the municipalities have agreed to have masking in place for their employees until at least the end of April. We're taking this cautious approach because there's still a little bit of uncertainty regarding the question of the province's decision on masking not being necessarily for the public settings, but yet throughout the pandemic, we've also tried to follow closely the Ministry of Labor requirements for masking, physical distancing, etc. So we figured that taking a cautious approach, factoring in those Ministry of Labor considerations, and also for that matter, just you know, we do realize what is happening out there with the latest variant, and we believe a cautious approach is the good thing to do, because further to Councillor Merlehan's point, you know, yes, we as an organization have gone through 2 years of this pandemic. And I would say that within the last month, we've had more COVID situations than throughout those 2 years. And in fact, you know, at one point in one particular department, you know, it was a question of whether from a business continuity, it was going to impact our ability to provide service level. Knock on wood, thankfully, that didn't happen. But that, I think, is indicative of the fact that, yeah, we're not done with COVID yet, and we still have to manage things from a business continuity standpoint. And so hence why the region and area municipalities are taking a much more cautious approach right now to the workplace.
Thank you. And Mayor Shant, you had your hand up earlier.
Thank you. In response to Councilor Merlehan's question, there's a couple of things to say. First of all, I agree with you. I think we're going to see lots of cases. What the health people are trying to manage is the ability of the hospitals to deal with the most severe cases. And so if that shifts, our medical officer of health, Dr. Wong, still has authority to make decisions in that regard. And hopefully the medical officer of health for the province as well will keep an eye on that. And if things change, then, there may be new rules come back in. But what we all hope is that, even if people get the virus, that it's not a severe case and that we can manage it much the same way that, we manage other diseases that come through.
Okay, thank you. And so I asked whether there's any other council reports, and seeing none. Okay, outstanding activity list. Anybody want to address that at all? And I'm not seeing that, so no notice of motion and adjournment. Everybody wants to stay. Okay, Councillor Martin and Councillor Merlehan, all those in favor? And that's passed. Council would like to thank all who participated or tuned in to the meeting tonight on your YouTube, our YouTube live stream. I will remind council to stay connected until we receive confirmation that the live stream has stopped. And good night, everyone, and thank you.